In 2019, Nintendo released the remake for The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, and I have some opinions about the game's art style, and not just the remake's art style, but also the director's cut from like 1998. Both of these versions of the game, I think they lose something that was only present in the original grayscale black and white version of Link's Awakening. Obviously, with the remake, this is a much easier thing for me to argue because it's the game remade from the ground up. However, with the director's cut, it's a little bit more of a difficult argument because the director's cut is just the same art style with a new, fresh coat of paint where things are actually colored in. However, I still hold true to this idea that the original black and white Game Boy version is the best looking version of Link's Awakening. To start, we'll go over the easy one. The remake is really good looking in many ways, but kind of off in others. And this is all an entirely subjective thing, so you're probably going to disagree with me on this, but that's okay. Firstly, I do kind of like how shiny everything is. I think it's kind of cute. And that is something that can be said about the art style overall. It's pretty cute. It's going for this kind of toy aesthetic that I think is pretty adorable. But for a Zelda game, I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest with you. I feel like the Wind Waker, with its very cartoony aesthetic, still wasn't looking like toys. It still had its own kind of functional art style that was kind of separate from what you would see from like a child's toy. Whereas this art style is pretty plainly like a toy. It's meant to have this plastic shine to everything looks like a little doll, and I think it's cute, but it's just not something that I would expect from a Zelda game. Other 2D Zelda games like Phantom Hourglass or even like A Link Between Worlds, they all kind of have this vibe to them that aren't toy-like, but they are kind of cartoony, and it works well for these games. If someone told me that they were going to remake Link's Awakening, I probably wouldn't have gone with this art style personally. For every one thing that I like, there's like another thing that I just think feels kind of off. Like some of the enemies look a little bit goofy compared to their Game Boy counterparts that otherwise kind of look more serious. And I think that maybe the art style kind of takes away from the rather depressing and kind of sad message that the game is trying to convey about time and convey about sort of like holding on to the now forever, which is a very subtle message, but I think it's there, and I think that the art style being very toy-like kind of takes away from that. But there is also the element of the soundtrack as well. The soundtrack, I'm not a huge fan of. It kind of fits along the lines with the visuals, that very toy-like aesthetic. We hear very toy-like piano sounds. We have these very cheap-sounding instruments, and I think it matches the given art style. However, I still don't really care for it as a Zelda soundtrack. Like, Mabe Village is probably one of my least favorite soundtracks of any Zelda game ever. I don't think it's a good song. I don't think it sounds good. Compared to the original Game Boy version, I think it sounds frankly pretty bad. And there are other dungeons and other things like this that have a similar theme where I'm just not a huge fan of them. That being said, I understand why people like this art style. I get it. It's cute. Like I said earlier, I understand it. But I think something is lost in terms of tone. If I could sum that up, I think the remake loses a lot of that tone that the original and even the director's cut has. It's a very different art style, and they were definitely not trying to remake the same art style. They were going something completely different, and that I can kind of understand. And you might say, well, how could they remake it such a simple art style, right? I would argue that A Link Between Worlds is a good rendition of A Link to the Past's art style. It does a pretty good job of modernizing it. The game kind of started as a remake of A Link to the Past, so its art style kind of reflects that. Things are very similar to what we would find in A Link to the Past, just some things kind of updated to, things kind of updated to the more modern day. Link's Awakening, it doesn't really feel like that. It feels like it's going for a different style, which is fine, it's just I'm not a huge fan of it. And then this brings me to kind of the more difficult argument. The director's cut also loses some of that charm. I think there's something to be said about the very plain art style of grayscale Game Boy games. I think there is a certain charm to them that you don't really quite get with a Game Boy Color game. And for some franchises, I would say that the color greatly enhances the experience, like Pokemon Crystal and Silver and Gold all look much better than like Red and Blue. I think that those games look far better. However, looking at Link's Awakening DX, I just don't feel the same way. I think what it boils down to for me is that I think some of the color choices feel off. And I say this because if you play the Oracle games, I think they do a better job with color. I know that they're like, a few years apart, but they might as well be the same art style. There's just something different about the Oracle games in terms of color than Link's Awakening Director's Cut. There's just something different about it. And on a much smaller note, I think the Director's Cut loses a lot of that player interpretation of how they want things to be. Like, did the egg on top of the mountain have to be white and pink? What if some of us saw it as like a white and a yellow or a white and a red? Right? There doesn't have to be this one kind of color. We can kind of interpret it as whatever we see fit. I mean, obviously the white part of the egg is white, but some of us may have pictured it as kind of an off-white or something like that. Link's tunic didn't have to necessarily be green, but we all kind of pictured it as such. There's a lot of interpretation that goes into a black and white art style, and I find that to be really lovely. I think it's fun to picture like what color is the bottle that the boss in the bottle grotto sits in, what color is that? It's kind of like a brownish kind of thing, but it's not very special. But what color is the nightmare? It shows up as black, but what does it like really look like if we put some detail into it? I think that some of this stuff kind of gets lost in translation, if that makes any sense. I just think that some of the colors don't really quite work. Now, that's not to say that the content in the Director's Cut, or even the remake, is all necessarily bad. I am planning on making a big video about the game itself because I just recently beat it on my Game & Watch, and now I'm kind of playing through the remake and through the Director's Cut on my 3DS, and playing it again and just really getting a feel for it. But I want to make a small video today talking about why I kind of really enjoy the black and white art style. I just think it's really cute. If you haven't played the original version of Link's Awakening, not even the Director's Cut, the original, I recommend you try to find it somewhere. It's pretty hard to come across in terms of like a ROM or like an actual physical copy in the world because everybody wants the Director's Cut. It's like the best version, and it is. It really is the best version of Link's Awakening, unless, well, some people think the remake is better. I disagree. I just do. That's just me, though. But if you're looking for that old school style, the original it's got a charm to it. Nintendo themselves don't even offer the original version on NSO. It's kind of crazy that on Nintendo Switch Online's Game Boy app, you can't even play the original version of Link's Awakening, you just have the Director's Cut. And yeah, I can kind of understand why. Again, it's the definitive version of the game. If you want the classic Game Boy one, you want the one with the color. But there's something just so simple about the original black and white version that I absolutely love. And I don't think the Director's Cut quite has that, and I especially think that the remake does not have it. Anyway, look forward to the future where I make an actual big long video about Link's Awakening. I have probably maybe a fourth or a third of a script on it done. It's getting along and we're getting around to it, but it's going to be a longer video, probably closer to an hour like I planned on for most of my longer videos. Anyway, tell me what you guys think about the art style of Link's Awakening. I'd be really curious to know. And with that, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye bye.